Hi, my name is Paul Vanderklay. If you've been watching my series on Jordan Peterson, you already know who I am. I wore a dinosaur hat today just because it seemed germane to to what we're going to talk about. I'm going to dive into the beginning of Biblical Series 2. Again, I appreciate and a little overwhelmed by the response to some of these conversations. I've gotten some good feedback, some constructive and critical feedback. I hope to be able to implement and incorporate some of that into it. So today I'm going to move really fast. And so I'm thinking part of what YouTube offers is that you can back up and rewatch and go through slowly, but I'm gonna move like the wind today. So here we go. Biblical Series 2. This is the second of his series where he begins with Genesis 1. And I, like Peterson, am not even going to get to Genesis 1 in this. In many ways, we're still in prolegomena. But so I started reviewing this again yesterday, and I wondered why does he begin with all this rambling about consciousness and being in time? And I'm not going to, there's some questions about fair use which I had. So this video is going to be clean in terms of I'm not going to drop in Jordan Peterson samples. I'm going to assume that anyone nerdy enough to watch this video has already watched Biblical Series 2 and has digested it to a degree. I've probably watched it 3 or 4 times. So you can go through and check my work if you want to, but the first 4 or 5 minutes of it are, and again, I'm starting to outline it as I talked about in my question and answer video, my comments on comments video. I've been working on outlining it, and so he begins Biblical Series 2 with all these ramblings about consciousness, being, and time. Now, right away you say, well, we went through the whole first lecture and he didn't even get to Genesis 1, and now he's starting the second lecture and he's doing the same thing over again. And I think we should be a little generous with him because he told us right from the start, hey, this is what I'm doing. I am learning this stuff by talking this stuff out loud. And there's no better motivation if you're a busy person than to have something on your calendar that says you're going to be standing up in front of 500 people and then 200,000 views on YouTube. You'd better have something to say, and you'd better work on it. And so this is exactly what he's doing. Now the big fight in the West, the big fight. We've talked about this a lot in the previous video, from medieval Catholicism to the Protestant Reformation to the Enlightenment, where you had rationalism and empiricism, to the death of God through Nietzsche, to Darwin, to Sam Harris versus Craig Evans. All of this, the big fight in the West, are the naturalists versus the supernaturalists, and that question gets down to is do we make God, or does God make us? And in some ways, this is, as I mentioned in my office video, the video where I talked about Jordan Peterson in the office, he's right in the middle of this triangle here, and we're going around this triangulation, and we're generating all of this energy in the culture war around Jordan Peterson, and this is, and it's and so what happens with this triangle is that this binary conflict gets a third element that gives it a lot of energy. And so with Peterson, we go round and round and round. Now the supernaturalist versus the naturalist conflict has a lot. It's not just a conflict of mind, it's a conflict of ideas. And I think Peterson is right in that, and there's biblical justification for this. If you read the book of James, I will show you my faith by my works, that in fact our true beliefs are manifested by what we do. Now, this is enormously complicated because I'll try and slow down. I'll try not to yell at you. I see I'm getting excited, and this is what I do. Let me take a deep breath. Our true beliefs are manifest by our actions, but our actions also betray our beliefs. So, for example, with all of the energy around Jordan Peterson, if Jordan Peterson went to church every week, and well, if he was Roman Catholic or even not Roman Catholic, but if he took the Eucharist every week, if he did overtly Christian public things, And we knew that unlike politicians in the United States who have to at least be overtly Christian because they'd have a hard time getting elected as an atheist. There's been a few, but not too many. You can be a practical atheist, but not a formal atheist. Jordan Peterson can be can live as if Christianity is true, and this makes his atheist and agnostic allies in some fights nervous. He can live as if Christianity is true, but if he slides over to become a formal Christian, well, then we've given up the Jim and Pam game. Then we've given up the energy creating triangle. And so the big question between supernaturalists and naturalists is there life after death, or when you die, or are you just gone only with the exception of the memories and the stuff that you left in the material world? Do you pray? Do you offer sacrifice in terms of tithing and going to church because somehow you believe this is significant in terms of your relationship with God? Do you believe you have a mission in life, or do you believe you create your own meaning? So this is in many ways in the West, since Darwin comes into this, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But now when Peterson, let me slow down. Can you establish a reasonable account of why he is emphasizing this is exactly why he's emphasizing his psychological interpretation. Even when Peterson was on Glenn Beck yesterday, he always prefaces what he says. Notice that he always prefaces what he says. This is a psychological interpretation, not a theological interpretation. Now, Peterson is doing this correctly for very specific reasons, and it's important if you listen to him, and not generate too much energy around that triangle, to understand what he is saying and why he is saying it. He is a scholar, and what scholars do is in order to try and be correct and be truthful, they try to limit what they say to a certain purview. But what generates that energy is we immediately understand, and if not in our conscious minds, then I think in this Jungian dream plurality of subpersonalities, our subpersonalities are getting excited back there because we're realizing there are implications to what he is doing. And so what Peterson is trying to do, and he said this in the Prolegomena in Biblical Series 1, he is trying to, that which he can establish a reasonable account for, that is what he's going to deal with. Now, why is it so important to establish a reasonable account? Well, in some ways, again, this book that Jordan Peterson pointed to in one of his lectures, The Metaphysical Club, I think it gets exactly right the importance of Darwin, because I mentioned this in a previous video. In the Metaphysical Club, there were plenty of theories of evolution before Darwin, and there were plenty of Christians that embraced evolution before Darwin. But the thing that, again, the second paragraph here, for a belief that a species evolve is not incompatible with a belief in divine creation or with a belief in intelligent design. Progressive adaptation might simply be the mechanism God has selected to realize his intentions. What was radical about On the Origin of Species, so I got my dinosaur hat on here. What was radical about On the Origin of Species was not its evolutionism, but his materialism. Now, I'm going to use materialism and naturalism kind of interchangeably here. They are not the same thing, but they share a lot of this the semantic range. So what was radical about On the Origin of Species was not its evolutionism, but its materialism. Darwin wanted to establish something even his most loyal disciples were reluctant to admit, which is that the species, including human beings, were created by and evolve according to processes that are entirely natural, chance-generated, and blind. Okay? That's the key thing. And I think part of the reason Darwin continues to stand at the middle of this fight in the West between Christians and materialists, naturalists, is because even if a lot of Christians can't, put it into words, they sense in their loose their loose conglomeration of these subpersonalities, they sense that Darwin is making this move, and this deeply disturbs them. And we're going to get into why it disturbs them, and also why Peterson is important, because all of this has to do with this. So Peterson in these biblical series is trying to establish a reasonable account. And I think part of what he means by that is he is trying to establish an account that hopefully, in his mind, Christians and materialist naturalists can in fact both appropriate and embrace and at least come together to talk about. And this is in some ways how Peterson is a disciple of Piaget. I had never heard before Peterson that Piaget began his career wanting to reconcile religion and science. Clearly, that is a big deal for Jung. So this I believe is something, and I don't know that Peterson has said it as such, but I think this is behind his project, and I think this is why his project gains so much attention and feels so important. Again, I'm Peterson has convinced me on the psychoanalyst position that we are more than just our conscious mind. It wasn't just Peterson, it was Haidt, it was it's my practical experience in ministry and working with people that our conscious brains are only one element of who exactly we are. And so Darwin makes this move and basically says, here, I've established something that shows we don't need a God to account for us. Now, throughout the history of Western civilization, there's been this question of the God of the gaps. And so here Darwin seems to close a gap. And we don't need a God to explain who we are. Now, this might feel like liberation to some, and it might feel like terror to others. And then Louis Menand goes on to note that Darwin regretted the word selection suggested as intention. That's exactly what he's trying to get away from. But the language is betraying him. And now this is important as we get later on into the video. Natural selection is a blind process. Pay attention. That's a metaphor. He can't communicate this without a metaphor. It's a blind process because the conditions to which organisms must adapt in order to survive are never the same. In periods of drought, when seeds are hard to find, finches that happen to have long, narrow beaks, good for foraging, will be favored over finches with broad, powerful beaks. More of their offspring will survive and reproduce. In periods of abundance, when seeds are large and their shells are hard, the broad-beaked finches will hold the adaptive advantage. Finchness is a variable, not a constant. That is, when I read that point, it was like, wow. And I still haven't been able to fully articulate this, but, right there, what Darwin does is, in a sense, now I'm going out on a limb here, in a sense, push us towards the kinds of social debates that Peterson is taking a somewhat conservative position on. And I'm going to fill that out as I get further into the video. So what Peterson wants to establish is a reasonable account, which means he wants to establish something that both Christians, maybe not the fundamentalists way over here on the right, but Christians and naturalists, materialists can maybe come together. And I think this is part of the reason why, again, in my comment section and very much in Peterson's comment section on Reddit, you see this litany of people saying, I was an atheist. Basically, the account of the world told by materialist and naturalist was too compelling, and this has created what Charles Taylor calls cross pressures. This has brought me to doubt my belief in the Bible, and in fact, for many in this community, they are willing to suffer for their cause. There's something very Christian about that. They're willing to strain their familial relations. They are willing to divorce themselves from institutions and relationships and practices that are embedded in religion that they no longer believe, even when those religious practices gave them consolation and some very important things in them. Now you will, again, I'm trying to do these videos quickly because I've got to fit them into the rest of my life, and I don't have, all the time in the world to hunt down to footnote my memories, because what I recollect from stuff I've read over the last 20 years is, I can't just throw that in. But you will, if you Google people who have taken what Charles Taylor calls the subtraction theory. People who have left Christianity, often after they leave it, part of them mourns. They remember the fun they had at Bible camp. They remember the community they had in the church. And so you see this with the likes, let's say, of Bart Campolo and others who have said, for credible reasons, the account of the death of God is too strong for me to contend with. Therefore, I am leaving the church, but I want to try to recreate the benefits of the church in my new agnostic, atheistic, material realm. And so then you have these Sunday celebrations where you have different music. God is taken out of it. You have the freedom from religion billboards. I generate my own meaning fine. So you have all of this work, and part of me often asks, I think she doth protest too much. Part of me says, really, can you really pull this off without God? And that's really a deep question I have in this, because if you look at the fact that we plant churches every day still, even in this terribly conflicted culture where it's hard. People become Christian all the time. People deconvert regularly. It seems a lot easier to start a church, even with doctrines and beliefs that I, as a conservative Christian, would consider wacko. Sometimes when I look at the types of ministers, I'm not going to name names, the type of ministers and televangelists that, in my opinions, look like frauds and charlatans, and I look at the massive followings they have, on one hand, that makes me doubt religion, but on the other hand, it reinforces the idea that religion is simply built into us, and it is so powerful, because I have not yet seen an atheist movement that can reproduce the sociological, psychological, and group cohesive benefits that religion seems to easily produce without God or without the supernatural. And I think this, again, Jonathan Haidt, I think gets into that very well, even though he, at this point at least, has said, he's not a person of faith. I personally hate that term, but there we are. Now I've lost track. So again, Peterson wants to establish a reasonable account. He wants to establish an account of God and the necessity of traditional practice. Now that's important, and that actually does get into what I was just talking about. That Jordan Peterson, as a psychologist, as a clinician, as someone who looks at history, as someone who, in my opinion, is tremendously honest. When he tells his story about getting honest, just how he tells that story, this man is sincere. This is why he caught the world's attention by becoming pronoun Peterson, by saying, I'm not going to use those made-up pronouns, and it might cost me my job, and it might cost me my reputation, but again, in his words, to violate my conscience costs me way more. And I played a little clip from Biblical Series 9 on Abraham. I believe it was 9. It was 9 or 12. It might be 12. Biblical, where he talks about Abraham, to say, you violate, you tell lies at your peril, and they are far worse than losing your job. They are far worse. And so that's why Peterson will stand in that crowd with everybody yelling at him, and he'll stick to his guns. And sure, part of that at some point may be ego setting in, but there's an important difference between doing that for the sake of ego and stubbornness and doing it because you're serious about your belief that honesty, self-honesty, and honesty with the world is so vitally important and in fact so integral to actually making you a person of substance and a person to contend with. So he wants to establish an account of God and the necessity of traditional practices. Beliefs follow and are known by practices. Again, he's a pragmatist, and he makes this point over and over again. Okay, so again, why again here and now? Why at the beginning of his conversation about Genesis 1 does he want to go into this conversation about consciousness and logos and this has everything to do with the supernaturalist naturalist conflict, because what he sees here reading Genesis 1 through John 1 is his revelation for how he can give a plausible materialist account through Jung and Darwin. Again, let me say that again. It is here in Genesis 1, informed by John 1, that Jordan Peterson constructs what he imagines to be, and we're going to debate that a little bit in this program, what he imagines to be a plausible materialist psychological account of consciousness and materiality. And that's what I'm going to run through here. So here's the big question. Is God an idea that we, human beings, Homo sapiens, generate, or are we beings that God generates? That's, in a sense, the division between the supernaturalist and the naturalist. Is God an idea that we generate, or are we beings that God generates? That's the fight. Now, Peterson wants to construct remember, he said this is a psychological telling. This is a rationalist telling. He says, I'm leaving the door open to the other side. I'm not closing them off. I'm being enormously inclusive here. And I think the testimony to his inclusivity is the fact that I, as a conservative Christian, am watching this, and many other conservative Christians are watching this, but also many people who are on the fence, who are cross-pressured, who have already gone over to the other side, are also watching this. He wants to give an account that is credible to the side that says God is an idea that we generate. Now, he's leaving open the possibility that God is a being that generates us. He says, I'm leaving that door open. I'm not being a reductionist, but I want to create this argument from the side that God is an idea that we generate. Okay? With the implication that this being existed before us and caused us to be. Okay, that's on the religious side. Now, this gets really complicated, and this is why This is why. Okay, so here's my thesis. Peterson is talking to our Jungian internal cloud of witnesses. Now, I'm appropriating a phrase from the book of Hebrews, but essentially this theory of the self, which has a conscious self surrounded by a loose affiliation of subpersonalities that have their own motivations, that have their own agendas, that have their own opinions, and as kind of in that movie Inside Out, that Pixar movie, they're down there in the control room and they're pushing buttons and the anger dude is lighting up and so on and so forth. The implication that see here's the thing, you can't get to Genesis. Well, Peterson's trying to answer, where do we get Genesis 1 and why is it important? This gets complicated because of the relationship between time and consciousness, and therefore he tackles the question of consciousness right off the bat here at the creation story. And what's more, he sees in this creation story the product of this Jungian cloud of witnesses being manifest in the selective unconscious coming up through myth, speaking to us what we can't consciously articulate or put in literal articulated form, but the product of this subconscious, which is myth, continues to speak to the cloud of witnesses inside of our head. And this is why this then generates the behavior and the popularity of the Bible, and the reason that when people read it, they say, huh. And the reason why this story traveled through, thousands and thousands of years, and in a Darwinistic sense, outcompeted the other story and trumped the other stories. And again, this is a phenomenological argument he is making, and he has plenty of evidence. Why on earth? You say, well, why on earth does Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, three powerful religions, why on earth does this story continue to have traction amidst the enormous diversity of humanity? So this gets complicated, and it is an incredible idea. And what you'll hear in the first part of this Biblical Series 2 is just count how many times Peterson just says, this is amazing. How could they have done this? This is incredible. This is astounding. This is brilliant. That, in my opinion, is analogous to Christian praise. This is what Christians do in worship. And Christians might not have a conscious articulation of, or be able to account for their motivation, but their Jungian cloud of witnesses brings this forth, and when they do it, my little congregation will never be known. I can't say will never be known. It is not known for its music. You go to some of the mega churches, and in many ways, many of the mega churches, music is what drives them. And I know some of the commenters have basically said, yeah, you got 40 minutes of music and then some silly little message, and then boom, you're out the door. And if you're like, I think, the self-selected group who are pouring into Jordan Peterson, the music isn't going to be enough. You need rationality. You are rational people, and you, like me, have to take an idea and you have to wrestle it like Jacob tries to do to God. You have to put it on the ground, and you are not satisfied until you have this thing, that this thing. And that's why a church with 40 minutes of enormously expressive music won't do it for you. But that's also why there's probably a far larger population out there that the music itself, and there have been some interesting psychological studies on the music, how you get a group of people together and you sing like that, it changes us. And this is part of the reason why megachurches, music in megachurches is so important, and why in our culture it's taken the style it has. Now, there's a huge church conversation on that I'm not going to get into, because that's kind of an in-house church conversation, but it's a really big deal. So again, back to the idea. Is God an idea that we generate, that we have generated via our Jungian cloud of witnesses, via our collective conscious? And is this what God is, or is God a being that has generated us? Now, when you get into the question of Genesis 1, you might think, yeah, this is a question that scientists are asking. But if you read John Walton, now again, John Walton is an Old Testament scholar. He's an evangelical. He taught for years at Wheaton, and he's been producing these books, The Lost World of Genesis 1. Now, I think for the audience of this video, let me say it this way. If you're already in the agnostic atheist camp or just emerging from that, you won't find this book very compelling. But if you're in the Christian camp, grew up fundamentalist, and have some pretty conservative ideas about creation and evolution, this book is, in a sense, tailored for you, because John Walton's argument in this book, here's another, being a Jordan Peterson fan is all about listing creating a list of who you want to see Jordan Peterson talk to. I want to see Jordan Peterson have a conversation with John Walton, because in many ways, if you listen to Peterson and you listen to Walton, the big point of Walton's book, of Walton's Lost World of Genesis 1 book, is Genesis 1 is not an account of how God made the stuff. Genesis 1 is an account of how God ordered the stuff into a functional, did you hear me? Into a functional reality. Now in that sense, Peterson and Walton, they're on the same page here. Walton is coming at it from the evangelical side. Peterson is coming at it from the science side, but they're both coming together and saying, saying Genesis 1 is an account. In fact, if I continue doing this, if I have time and interest and motivation and all of this to continue doing this, and I actually start talking about Genesis 1, Walton says, is a temple text. This is a temple text. And then we're going to have to get into what temple is in terms of the Bible. But Genesis 1 is a temple text. Genesis 1 is not an account of how God made stuff. Genesis 1 is an account of how God ordered the world into a perfectly functioning cosmos. And so when you read what John Walton from a Christian side and you listen to Jordan Peterson from his agenda, you begin to say, hey, these two are not far at all. And when we get talking about chaos, this is in a lot of ways where the conversation is going to get interesting, because Peterson is already there and evangelicals are on their way. So there's that. Now remember the prolegomena. If we can account for something by means of a credible story, then we might not need a God to account for being. And by being, I don't just mean the physical world. By being, I mean what Peterson means as being. And it's taken me a while. If you listen to the transliminal videos, those are some of the best videos out there. Great interviews. But if you listen to Peterson on being, it took me a while to figure out what he means by being, and my Jungian cloud has it semi-appropriated. I still can't quite articulate it, and Peterson himself struggles to articulate what being is, but we might not need a God to account for being. Now remember, Peterson isn't saying there isn't a God, but Peterson is saying I'm creating a psychological and phenomenological account of God. That's a big deal. And others, to be fair, there's a great CBC. Why do you Canadians have so much good stuff? There's a great CBC series on beyond theism. And I'm a religious conservative here. So but I'm also a religious conservative who is high in openness, and so I want to listen to these other people. And I think I'm secure enough in my beliefs now after 50 years, and they've been tested by fire in ways that I won't go into in a public forum here. I don't feel the danger of myself leaving my Christian faith. And so I still want to listen to these people. So Beyond Theism, I think is the name of it. It was a CBC series. Fascinating thing. So there's a whole bunch of post-theists out there still trying to be Christians and trying to figure that out, and they're out there, and there's guys like Marcus Borg, who, here's a book about debating N.T. Wright and Marcus Borg. They're all out there. So we might not need a God to account for being, but this relies on story, and this is where the conversation between Peterson and Weinstein and Harris is really important. And this big move, the big move that if we can account for. See, Darwin wanted to say we can account for human beings without God. Peterson says here is possibly an account of God without God. Can we do that? Peterson says it relies on story. And if it relies on story, and this is where I'm going to eventually get into C.S. Lewis and miracles. If it relies on story, then Brett Weinstein's assertion that the material layer, or the physical layer, I think physical is probably a better word, the physical layer is the top layer, Peterson is going to basically make the argument that says, Well, and in fact, exactly, John. I wish I could figure out how you say your last name, Jonathan. Jonathan. He's the Orthodox guy that Peterson talks to. Jonathan Pajot. I should listen to more of his videos. I've been too busy making videos to listen to videos lately, and it's starting to annoy me. But John Pajot counters Weinstein on that and says you cannot say top layer without basically asserting story. And this gets into where I think Peterson's finally lands, which is we cannot have this conversation without story, which means that the physical layer will never finally be the top layer. We as human beings, by virtue of who we are and how we think and how we must interact with this physical world, this is because of Kant, this is this whole argument that Peterson has been making, the physical layer can never be the top layer because we cannot appropriate it except by story. So if the Bible is a book that we generated by our collective dream state, this Jungian cloud of witnesses, because it is smarter than we are. Now remember again, and Jonathan Haidt says this too, us and our whole minds, not just the conscious part, the elephant and the rider, our whole minds, the Jungian cloud of witness is smarter. The Jungian cloud of witness within Paul Vanderklay is smarter than conscious Paul Vanderklay talking to you. Okay? And I'll agree with that. Because the Jungian cloud of witnesses, if something gets thrown at me, it ducks. The Jungian cloud of witnesses has intuition. And in this, thank you, I don't remember your name, who pointed me to that 2013 Jonathan Haidt video about the rationalist delusion. Terrific video. And I think he points out well that we are not rationalists. We really work by intuition. I think this very much is evident even in how scientists work within their scientific process. First they have intuition, then they go to prove it. And as Peterson says, the really good scientists are the ones who keep disproving their intuitions because they're honest and humble and they're actually working science. So anyway, the Jungian cloud of witnesses in Paul Vanderklay is smarter than the conscious Paul Vanderklay talking to you now, because I can only actually articulate a fraction of what I know into words. And what happens when I dream is that my mind continues to work. What happens when I talk and engage with you, even through this weird interface called YouTube, is that I am growing smarter even by talking. And that is, again, where Peterson gets into word, because spoken word, and again, this is right in Biblical Series 2, spoken word is more than just thought. So, and if that's true for me as Paul Vanderklay, that my Jungian cloud of witness is smarter than I am, again, reference Jonathan Haidt in his Rationalist Delusion, we together as communities are smarter than we are as individuals, okay? And I think we know that because as individuals, we are horribly biased towards self. So we as communities are smarter than we are as individuals. That is concrete and that is important. And so now, if we as communities are smarter than we are as individuals, I'm not reading it anyway, so I might as well show me instead of being up in the corner. If we as communities are smarter, if we as individuals are smarter as this Jungian cloud of witnesses than we are as conscious individuals, we as communities, we know because of our bias, are smarter as communities. We can actually, through diversity and through each other challenging our biases, we are smarter as communities than we are as individuals. Then we as the sum of these great cloud of witnesses, these Jungian great cloud of witnesses in each of us, Jung says all of this together, again, this is Peterson's reasonable account, gets manifest in myth. And so these myths are smarter than we are. They are smarter than we can articulate. And this is behind Peterson's assertion that this is why you can't re-engineer a fairy tale just because you think you're very smart. Because you are not as smart as the community that you are sharing the contemporary space in. And you are certainly not as smart as the community not only of our contemporary space, but our community of our ancestors all the way through time, at least 10,000 years of civilization. And Peterson, being an evolutionist, says all the way back, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years. You are not that smart. And I find that to be a devastating argument. Now, again, I'm not saying it's an argument for the non-existence of God, and Peterson's not making that argument. He's saying this is an argument that, oh, little man, and again, as a Christian, this is what I've been brought up in, because this is what God tells us. Read the book of Job. Read the book of Job. Job gets a raw deal because God and Satan have a wager. It's kind of like Trading Places, if you remember Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. God and Satan have a wager, and God says, have you considered my servant Job? And Satan says, he's in it for the money. And God says, take away all his stuff. Well, when he takes away his stuff, in very much an Old Testament frame of mind, he kills all his kids. He takes away all his herds. And then he loses everything, and Job tears his clothes, and he sits on a pile of ashes. And to make matters worse, his wife comes up to him and says, curse God and die. Naked I've come into the world, naked I'll leave it. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Oh. We are not that smart. So here in the book of Job, we have this question. And then Satan says, skin for skin. And God says, okay, but don't touch his life. And then he's got boils. And then Job's three friends come. And they throw a theological argument at him. Basically, a karma argument at him, says there must be a secret sin in your life. And those of you who are raised, very fundamentalist have heard these arguments before. There must be a secret sin. And Job is pushed to the limit. And Job finally says, okay, God, I want you in trial. I want you in the dock across from me. I want you to answer these questions. And God says, really? Were you there when I created the stars? Were you there? Now we're going to get into chaos. Were you there when, in a sense, I roped the Leviathan? It's almost a rodeo image. Were you there? I can go into chaos and take the most terrifying sea monster you can imagine and make it tame as a kitten. Job, are you that smart? This is, in a sense, what Peterson is saying, in that not only, okay, so again, let me run through the argument. Paul Vanderklay, the conscious guy talking to you, is not anywhere near as smart as the Jungian cloud of witnesses that make up Paul Vanderklay. Paul Vanderklay and his Jungian cloud of witnesses are not anywhere near as smart as contemporary humanity around Paul Vanderklay, which is why we're talking, which is why we're having conversation, which is why free speech is so important. So I'm not anywhere near as smart as all of us. All of us is way smarter than Paul Vanderklay. Now, all of us throughout time are way smarter than all of us right now. This gets into what C.S. Lewis calls chronological snobbery, because C.S. Lewis says basically we are high on our own technology, and because we have smartphones, we think we're smarter than everyone else. And C.S. Lewis, who was a classicist, who read just about everything in the ancient world, who knew myths backwards and forwards, and in fact played with it, read, if you get a chance, Till We Have Faces. C.S. Lewis, although Tolkien was a better myth writer than C.S. Lewis, but C.S. Lewis knew mythology, and C.S. Lewis said, we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. And Peterson is saying the same thing. And C.S. Lewis says, don't you imagine we are smarter than all of these people who came before us. Look at the great people in history. Look at Plato. Look at Pascal. Just go throughout history and look at these people. Don't be so full of yourself. And so Peterson, through Jung, is saying, this whole community created these myths, and these myths tell us what we can't articulate, so we ignore them at our peril. So, The Bible is a book that we generated by our collective dream state because it is smarter than we are. It knows more than we know. It teaches us reality beyond what we can articulate in our conscious minds. Then it is a book that we had better not do away with at our peril. I love it every time. You should have a drinking game. Every time Jordan Peterson says at our peril, have a drink. Maybe have a drink of cranberry juice or something, because it would be very unsortingly to be drinking vodka while you're trying to sort your life out. So now you have a naturalistic defense of the Bible, and therefore it has a legitimate voice in ethics. Now remember my past videos that the crisis of the contemporary world is that, okay, so after the Protestant Reformation, we were looking for a common framework for truth. And so in the Enlightenment, we have empiricism and rationalism. And so then the question after that was, now we need a common framework, a common platform for ethics. And we haven't arrived at consensus on that. And again, now maybe Matt Bacon's going to take issue with me on this. I don't think we've arrived at an atheistic platform for ethics. And now I'm going to go a step further. I don't think, philosophically speaking, okay, I'm not saying practically speaking, I'm not saying atheists are immoral people or atheists are unethical people, or there are many atheists who are more moral and more ethical than myself. We still have the problem of how to judge between ethical systems, how to judge between culturally derived ethical systems, and I still find Nietzsche's point compelling that in the West, there's a bunch of people running around saying God is not only dead, he never was, but they're still borrowing from Western Christian cultural ethics. Because what happened in the late Roman period into the medieval period was that Christianity so dominated that it got into the ethical realm. And this continues, for example, with the Imago Dei. I would love to hear, okay, Sam Harris, if you're watching, I know you're not, but I would love to hear you construct an ethical system without the Imago Dei. I think humanism itself is the product of Christianity and the Imago Dei here from Genesis 1. And I don't, for all of the contemporary, supposedly secular, atheistic, ethical systems in the West, I have not yet heard one that isn't humanist. And I think if it's humanist, you have not divorced yourself from Genesis 1. You have not divorced yourself from the Bible. Now you're trying to, try and get rid of the patriarchy and all the other stuff in the Bible that gets you upset and allergic. And we could talk about how Christianity, again, right there in Genesis 1, as Peterson points out, the man and the woman are both made in his image. Now, that's going to help you in terms of your gender equality. I don't know how that's going to help you in terms of getting away from your gender binary. So Sam Harris and his followers, I will believe you when you tell me you have an ethic that can stand up to Nietzsche, when you tell me you have an ethic that is not humanist. Now you will say, no, it has to be humanist. And I say, yeah, that's right. That's why you're part of Western civilization. Because the Western critique of radical Islam, the Western critique of traditional Christianity, the Western critique of the way women are treated around the world in non-Western countries, the justification that when women are treated better, societies do better, all of that is founded, in my opinion, on the Imago Dei in Genesis 1. And we are so deeply embedded in this humanism in our culture. When someone crosses that line on humanism, and I know some of the animal rights are, we need to get rid of the human privilege. Well, when you cross that line, now you're exiting humanism. But that's when, again, trigger Jordan Peterson here, that's when he says we do this at our peril. Jordan Peterson, at our peril. Have a drink. We do this at our peril because because once you lose the humanism, which is built on the imago Dei, now we can have the justification for basically what we saw in the 20th century, what we saw from the Nazis, what we saw from the Soviet Union. Okay, Matt Bacon, yeah, I'm taking 4 times as long. It's just going to have to be that way, because the problem is that as I go through this again, I went through this all this morning when I woke up, and I ran to my office to make this so that I'll actually have time to do my job today instead of making videos for you all. And for me, because I'm not making them for you all as much as I'm making them for me. And again, I'm deeply grateful that anybody watches this. It is comical. Then it is a book that had that we had better not do away with at our peril. Now you have a naturalist defense of the Bible, and therefore it has a legitimate voice in ethics, the failure of the project to generate values and morality from the physical layer. I think that project has failed. They have not yet succeeded at it, and I think because of how we know the physical layer through scientific revolution, again, if you replay, was it Personalities, where Peterson is talking about Nietzsche, and then Solzhenitsyn, the existentialist, you've eliminated that. You've eliminated, in order to have science, you've eliminated the story level. You've already taken it out of the equation. This is why you can't bring it into the equation later and say, aha, I've generated ethics. And this is exactly the point C.S. Lewis is going to make in this, and it's exactly the point Nietzsche keeps making, that on one hand we say, oh, we've segmented, we've created a clean room away from story, and now we have science, which is not dependent on anyone's interpretation of the Bible or anyone's ideology. Now we're accessing the physical layer. True, that is what science is. But by definition, you cannot construct an ethical system without story, because the only way to describe ethical behavior is by use of story. The physical layer can only be appropriated within the story layer. And that's why I think rationally it is impossible. And I know that's a strong claim, and I'm willing to be wrong, and I'm very willing to have people push back on it. It is impossible to create a scientific ethic. And I think the failure of that project, I think philosophers have been working at this and trying, and you know, I've by no means looked at all of their systems. In fact, I'd say I'm terribly uneducated in this, so maybe I should shut up. But by seeing what Peterson is laying out here, and by what I know anyway, I suspect it is impossible to create an ethical system simply on scientific terms, because the scientific method precludes the story world by definition. And you cannot have an ethical system without the story world, so story keeps creeping in, such as your humanism. So, remember how many times Peterson makes the point that he is looking for something practical. He says again and again, I only want to give you what is practical, because he's a pragmatist, because practice comes first, both in terms of forming our belief, and belief is expressed in practice. And we, because of our Jungian great cloud of witnesses inside of each of us, we're disconnected from ourselves. We're alienated from ourselves. Again, reference the existentialist. He is looking for the Bible to help Western civilization not fall off the platform that brought its greatness. You'll hear him say this many, many times. The argument is independent of, and this is key for Peterson and why we keep going around the triangle with him, this argument is independent of the God as idea versus God as supernatural cause of reality. So in other words, he's saying, I want to set that aside. I want to set that fight to the side. Okay? And I want to talk to both camps. And I want to make an argument that can satisfy my materialist, naturalist allies and give an account for the Bible that can satisfy them through Piaget, Jung, Nietzsche, that can satisfy them and say, this is why Brett Weinstein, and especially you, Sam Harris, because Brett Weinstein's kind of a moderate position. Sam Harris is over at the extreme, and the new atheist saying, Even listen to In the Rationalist Delusion by Jonathan Haidt. Listen to what he has to say about the new atheists. You might also look around for a look on YouTube. If you're really a philosophy nerd, look around on YouTube for a surreptitiously recorded debate between Alvin Plantinga and Daniel Dennis. You'll enjoy it. Anyway, Peterson wants to construct an argument for not only, Peterson wants to bring the Bible back into the public realm. Now, this terrifies people. And I understand that, because they look back and say, oh my goodness, this is why we had the Enlightenment. We did this to stop having Protestants and Catholics kill each other. And the wars in Northern Ireland were not that long ago. We just got over this. And so, Peterson, you're bringing the Bible back in now that we finally are trying to lay it to rest so that we can have same-sex marriage, and we can have transgender bathrooms, and we can have gender equality and equal pay for women. And now you're going to bring the Bible back in? This is why Peterson is a threat. And it's a threat that hundreds of thousands of people are watching it on YouTube, and this is why Peterson so often gets wrongfully aligned with the alt-right, because in the low resolution viewing of Peterson by people on the left, again, our consciousness always defaults to duality. He's not with us. He's with them, therefore Peterson must be alt-right. And again, I think if you sit down and you work through what Peterson is saying, he's not at all alt-right. He is making a claim that the Bible matters and ought to come back into the conversation because we lose it at our peril. Because this is the platform we stand on. In a sense, he's with Nietzsche saying to Sam Harris, you're sneaking in the Bible. You're not admitting it, but as long as you have that humanist base, now this is my argument, not Peterson's, as long as you have this humanist base, Nietzsche still has it on you. Nietzsche still has it on you. So, again, I should have brought this in. This is the Jungian great cloud of witnesses. But now this dynamic creates the collective dream state that governs, analogous to how subpersonalities govern the individuals. This is the argument. It knows more than we can articulate. And the Bible and other myths are expression, and again, his openness to other myths is what, gives him hearing in the spiritual but not religious camp, because they get nervous when they get hives when you start saying the Bible alone, sola scriptura. So this is why we get the triangulation and the movement around the triangle. The Bible and other myths are expression of that consciousness that we are not, that we had better not do away with at our peril. At our peril. Okay. So how do we get this idea, and what is the connection to Genesis 1? The story via Jung is that the subconscious subpersonalities, by watching the behavior of other beings for millions of years, develop consciousness, the Jungian great cloud of witnesses. See, now I've even got, this is why I can't leave Peterson alone, because, what am I doing? I'm acting. This idea, the Jungian great cloud of witnesses, in me has become an action. And I'm going to get into this a little bit later, but I can't think of this without doing this with my hands. Why is that? I'm a human being, and I can't stop this. I talk with my hands in front of my face. After listening to Peterson, I got my whole family doing this. What has Jordan Peterson done to me? What has Jordan Peterson done to you? I'm blessing him right now. I found him tremendously helpful. And again, I have friends that look at me and say, well, we always knew you're a little nuts. And talking to YouTube, you are a little nuts. So, the story via Jung is that the subconscious subpersonalities, by watching the behavior of other beings for millions of years, develop consciousness, and through that consciousness change the chaos of the material layer into productive, ordered space in which those beings may inhabit and thrive. That is the Logos. Right there. That is the Logos in a paragraph. I didn't put that together till now, till I spoke it. Again, speaking is more than thinking. I'll read it again. The story via Jung is that the subconscious subpersonalities, by watching the behavior of other beings for millions of years, develop the consciousness, and through that consciousness change the chaos of the material layer into productive, ordered space in which those beings may inhabit and thrive. That is the Logos. God, for, again, Jung, this is Peterson's, again, he's not precluding the other story that God is the cause. God is a supernatural cause of the material world and our story world. He's not precluding that. He says that over and over again. Take him seriously with that. But he's saying if we're developing a rational, psychological, naturalistic account through Jung, God is that collective unconscious that is supranatural. Not supernatural, he's supranatural, beyond the conscious control, because, again, just as my conscious self, is not fully in control of my whole self, so also God is not, we have stories about God, but we don't control him. And in fact, theology is always a communal enterprise. And God himself is a communal enterprise, if God is an idea. Okay, so again, understand what we're doing here, please, because I know some people are not going to understand this, and they're going to write me more notes and say, how can a Christian author, I haven't written anything, how can a Christian pastor say these things? Understand the project. Please understand the project. Okay? God is a collective unconscious that is supernatural, beyond conscious control, product of the collective consciousness that transforms the material world into productive space. And this is, again, Kant and Peterson saying the material world is not productive space, humanly speaking, in terms of what we, as opposed to what primates and other mammals and other reptiles have been able to do with us. They have not changed the story. And again, read Harari, read Yuval Harari in Sapiens and Homo Deus. We are exceptional. And this itself is an argument, is a non-theistic argument for humanism. We are exceptional. And in how we have terraformed the world. And in fact, again, read 1493. Fun book. We are exceptional. So, gosh, how long am I going? All right, well, we'll keep going. God is the collective unconscious that is supernatural, beyond the conscious control, product of the collective consciousness that transforms the material world into productive space. Genesis 1 is the account of that supranatural consciousness doing this through us and for us. And we ignore it at our peril. That's water, by the way. The reality of this God, while the product of our supernatural collective consciousness, is greater than any of us, isn't and maybe can't be fully known by any of us. This is the Christian, this is the, at the end of, I didn't do a video about it, but at the end of Biblical Series 1, Peterson has as a really fun Trinitarian treatment of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit based on things that he pulled out of the Bible to describe them. Part of Christian tradition, I don't have, my works of systematics are over there, but if you read systematic theology will say, on one hand, we only know God by revelation, but God is unknowable. We can't fully know him. Peterson says the same thing. And he's arriving at this via a materialist, rationalist, naturalist argument via Jung. And this is why I think Jung has been, Haidt made reference to this in his Rationalist Delusion video. It was actually in his interview with Jordan Peterson. Jung is not trusted. Jung is not trusted by Christians because they say he's a spiritualist and an occultist and has associations with New Agers. This gives credibility with the spiritual but not religious camp in the triangle. Materialists don't trust Jung either because they're like, hey, yeah, you're sneaking religion in. And Peterson, as a disciple of Jung, is saying, no, it better be on the table. And here's my argument. This is my argument why the Bible needs to come back into the conversation, and we fail to do it. You wait for it. At our peril. See, I'm a preacher, and this is what I usually do with an audience, so I can't help but do it with you all. So the reality of this God, I could put quotation, square quotes around God too in that, while a product of our supernatural collective unconsciousness is greater than any of us, isn't and maybe can't be fully known by any of us as individuals. God is ineffable, not fully knowable, can't be fully articulated by us as a group, and certainly can't be articulated by us as individuals, had better be respected. And we had better treat it as God, and if we fail to do it, we do so at our peril. We can offer sacrifices to it. In fact, he would say we must. We can offer sacrifices to it. We had better worship it. We had better submit our behavior to it. Ethics. If we don't do this, we avoid it. If we don't do this, we avoid it individually and collectively at our own peril. This is a behavioral question as well as a belief question because, again, Peterson is a pragmatist. So if you, via the existentialist, again, if you want to know Peterson, watch his stuff. He tells you everything about him. He can't help but talk. He is a motor mouth, and I am too. But he's telling us the whole thing. It's just our Jungian cloud of witnesses is picking up on it and saying, well, there's something here, I can't sort it out. And I haven't had a dream about Jordan Peterson yet. I don't know if I will after making these videos. But, we're sorting it out. And so this is what's going on. So maybe I'm trying to sort out Jordan Peterson. What Peterson has achieved by this, you have a naturalistic account or a story, not only of the existence of a God that creates the world we inhabit, even if he didn't create the stuff of this world, that demands all the traditional behaviors we associate with religion and its benefits, that isn't simply dispensable because Darwin comes along, that you must respect regardless, because, Peterson has solid credentials as a Darwinist, that you must respect regardless of whether you come down on the naturalistic side of the line or the supernaturalist side of the line. It is independent of that question, which we imagine is the first question. In other words, all the way back to the beginning, Peterson is saying the first question is not, and this is what wrangles religious people. Peterson is saying the first question is not, is God an idea? Or is God a supernatural being that created us in order to be capable of having ideas about him? Because that's essentially the religious claim. Religious people want to say that is the first question. And Peterson is saying that is not the first question because I can construct a psychological, phenomenological, naturalistic argument via Jung for God and the Bible. Now, it's up to you whether you believe he's done that. And so this is always, do you believe he's done it? Do you believe he hasn't done it? It's power. I think he's made a powerful argument. And I think, well, how would we know if it's a powerful argument? I don't know. Maybe 500,000 people have subscribed to his YouTube page. Yeah, maybe some of them have a political axe to grind and, they're feeling dislocated by what's happening sociologically in our culture with respect to gender and race and political incorrectness and all of that stuff. And so maybe that's why they're listening to Peterson. But I don't think that's his main agenda. The applications that he is prescribing with respect to free speech are products, to the degree that any human, we can say this about any other human, are products of his belief system. And I think actually Peterson has probably had this for a number of years. I never read his Maps of Meaning book, but from what he's told us, he's had this for a number of years, and it's only coming to light now. We're only paying attention to him because of the political things. Now, again, there's a guy, Aaron something, who's doing a newsletter called The Masculinist. Now, a certain group of you would really get into that, trust me. Aaron Wren. I picked up the link. I think that's his name. I picked up the link from Rod Dreher on the American Conservative. But he basically says, and this is kind of an assumed way that we locate God, that God, that God is that which comes in suddenly. And you read this in C.S. Lewis's critique of pantheism, that, to be a pantheist makes God a non-actor. And this is why I if you watch the movie, the Titanic guys movie, with the blue aliens and all of that. Why can't I think of the title? Maybe it's early onset. It'll come to me when I'm done. But they have this pantheistic realm, and C.S. Lewis says that's our natural religion, which is pantheism. But finally, that religion falls apart when God actually reaches through and grabs you. And again, if you go to Jordan Peterson's talk about Abraham, God grabs Abraham out of his father's house and says, "Go to the land I will show you." And then God, brings him through this incredible journey. And so here we are. You must respect, regardless of whether you come down on the naturalistic side of the line or the supernaturalist side of the line. It is independent of that question that we imagine is the first question. This is not the first question. So is Peterson communicating with our subpersonalities, and therefore it gets manifest in more interest in God? Absolutely. And I think I base that on Jordan Peterson's framework. This is why he is having the effect he is having inside of me, inside of you, inside of how many of you who have written and said, "I'm an atheist and I'm giving this another thought." Well, there you go. I think Peterson is doing something. Okay. PVK, that's what I usually, my initials, it's what I usually sign off on. So PVK's questions for JBP. Is the first question really set aside by this? And I think Sam Harris and I would be in agreement on this, talking to Peterson. Is the first question really set aside by this? Is it really important as to whether or not we can submit, obey, sacrifice to worship? That's a big claim, and I'm willing to listen to it. In fact, but I have biases that make me willing to listen to it, because I'm high in openness. And maybe one of these days I took one of those little big five personality tests. It was fun. I'm high in openness. That didn't surprise me when I looked at that. I'm high in openness. I like people. I am a peacemaker. I like people getting together. The war between this is why now maybe a bunch of atheists couldn't subscribe to the beliefs of my denomination, but if I had a church full of atheists who listened to me every week and said, "I don't believe it, but let's have an interesting conversation about it," I'd love it, because I love atheists. I love agnostics. I love people. So yeah, but can the first question really be set aside? I don't know. That's a question I have. An idea that results from the material is, an idea that results from the material lever, God being that idea, or a being that caused the whole thing. Can that first question really be set aside? My second question: what does this do to the material layer? Now, let's see if I did another slide. Yeah. What does this really do to the material layer? Now this is where things get interesting, because this is where you get into the biological essentialist fight. And Peterson and Weinstein and Harris in that fight are allied. And they're saying, hey, not only does Peterson saying, you'd better not get rid of the Bible, you do so at your peril, Peterson is also saying, you'd better not get rid of biology or science, you do that at your peril. So he makes Weinstein and Harris nervous when he talks about the Bible, but he and his 500,000 YouTube followers encourage Harris and Weinstein when he says we need biology. In other words, Peterson, in a sense, is transcending this fight, which is why he says, let's set the first question aside. But here's the tension in this that Weinstein and Harris are rightfully noting. Even if you say story creates order and that story was generated by a materially, naturally evolved creatures, even if you say that, story is then the trumping reality. This is where you get into Brett Weinstein saying, that the physical layer, the material layer is the top layer, the layer science deals with. And then Peterson comes back and says, yeah, but we can't appropriate that layer or talk about that layer or ethically engage in that layer without story. But once story trumps physicality, now suddenly you open the door to me saying, today I feel like Shirley Temple. And in my mind, my gender identity is Shirley Temple. And if you tell me that my gender identity isn't Shirley Temple, I will get the law to charge you with a hate crime and so on and so forth. And now a biological essentialist, and in fact a historical essentialist or a rationalist will come to me and say, you are not Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple Black died a number of years ago. She had a screen career as a cute little girl who sang song and danced, and everybody loved her, and she was important for the Depression. But you, Paul Vanderklay, a 6'4", 200-plus-pound pastor in Sacramento, California, cannot appropriate Shirley Temple as your gender identity. And you surely may not appropriate, how many other cultural artifacts as your gender identity. So in that way, Peterson and Harris and Weinstein are correct in saying that this whole side isn't really going to be able to hold together. It's going to fall apart because there are too many inconsistencies in it. But if you make story trump biology, you open the door to everything that the Enlightenment tried to deal with in putting out the fires of the Protestant Reformation. And okay, so now I'm a conservative pastor, okay? I believe God created the world. I subscribe to the Heidelberg Catechism and the Belgic Confession and the canons of Dort. I better say that one. I subscribe to the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Athanasian Creed. But I understand Weinstein and Harris's concerns. And I think clearly Peterson understands his concerns, or he wouldn't have stood up and picked this fight in the way he did that, might cost him his job in Toronto. That's something in this story we have to contend with too. If the story realm trumps the physical realm, which I believe it does, there needs to be boundaries along that. Because if that just flows wherever it goes, then you get into, and if you go to my blog, you can find I did a lot of blogging about David Brooks' book, The Road to Character, because actually David Brooks begins to get into this thing. So stories, in essence, creating a new reality. So isn't it therefore possible to transcend our biology while not actually transcending the physical realm? And so this is where, okay, now I'm going to put my Christian hat on again. Well, even my dinosaur hat. This is where Christianity comes in, because Christianity says the Word became flesh. And that doesn't just mean, well, okay, so it's Christmas time. In Jesus' incarnation, the Logos becomes flesh. John 1, I preached on it last week, and I'll bring some elements of my sermon in right now. When you get to the resurrection, the Logos becomes creation 2.0. That the God, through the story world of the resurrection, and again, I believe in a physical resurrection, creates renewed flesh. So, the Holy Grail. You need an account that finally sets up the proper relationship between the story realm and the naturalist realm. You've got to get that story straight. If you don't get that story straight, on one end, you wind up with me appropriating the gender identity of Shirley Temple. On the other end, you wind up with saying, well, the material level is the top level. But that's subject to Peterson and Kant's critique that it can't be. Well, even if you say it is, you can't appropriate it and you can't do with it. So in other words, that idea will always only be theoretical and it can never be ethical. So you need an account that finally sets up the proper relationship between our story selves, our story realm, and nature. Story does trump nature because we cannot engage productively with nature without it, a la Peterson and Kant, and I think they're both right. The physical layer can't be the top layer for us because we can't appropriate it, engage in it, comprehend it because of how we are. We're products of it. Are we? Are we not? We can't do it. And so all of our trying to do it is not going to work. Well, they may say, well, how do you know we can't? Well, fair question. So Sunday, again, this is maybe an example of how Peterson has helped me become a better preacher, I think, and helped me conceive things that, I asked myself the question, representations. This has been a really helpful thing for me with Peterson. Why the representation of a light bulb over a person means idea. In fact, if you do a Google image search on idea, you will find light bulbs. And why is that? And this gets into John 1, Genesis 1, why word and light, why are they created? Now, I did the rough draft of my sermon on YouTube, and you can find that on my channel. If you want to see the actual sermon, you'll have to go to my church channel, and I do put my sermons on YouTube too, and you can find my sermon on YouTube on the church channel, on the church Facebook page. That's where we have our live services on Sunday. If you're curious about that, hey, I'm a preacher. I always get criticized by my members because I don't promote my church enough. Maybe that's why it's such a tiny church, but here we are. So here is, the light bulb. Why do we all get that? Why do we all understand that as idea? I can understand the question mark, but why the light bulb? Well, it's because deep inside of us, and again, Peterson would say all the way back to crustaceans, we're, light and word, this all comes together. As a Christian who answers the first question in the other realm, I would say, because, well, now you get into nominalism and all those kinds of things, way back into medieval theology. But now you get into the question, is God essentially this because this is essential, or is this essential because God decided? And that's not a question I'm going to get into here. But it's an interesting question. So I discovered that, well, everybody on the internet, even though I can't find it, says light bulbs over the head came through Felix the cat. And Felix the cat wasn't even called Felix at first. It was, Feline Follies. And when animators are first trying to figure out animation, well, they're using, and again, Peterson has been so helpful in just teaching me representation and psychology and mythology and all of these, and it makes perfect sense that when they're first starting animation, movie animation, they're appropriating the realm of cartoons that had been in newspapers, and in cartoons you have a little box that has the words. And they haven't figured out yet how to use motion, how to use action in this animated world to communicate. And so then they start using little question mark above the little cat's head. Now take a look at Felix. He looks pretty much here like a normal cat in 1919 in the first video. Then he's even called Master Tom. Now even look at him now. Now his, his mouth is exaggerated, but for the most part, he's still a semi-normal cat. But as again, they're using words to say things because they haven't figured that out. Later animations, you won't have all those words over it, and then they're using line of sight. But again, look at Felix. He pretty much looks like a cat. Jump a few years later, they have figured out how to communicate, and they communicate through eyes. And so now Felix's eyes are huge, and his mouth is huge, and his head is huge, and his body is anthropomorphized, and his thoughts, well, we know that's a pretty girl cat, and there's Felix, and then now we know that Felix expresses emotion and plot and all of that through his eyes, And then, of course, what we see is that, oh, Walt Disney, if you know anything about the story of Walt Disney, Felix the cat is just immensely popular, and Disney needs a character, and so he creates a mouse, because you don't want to have a cat. He creates a mouse, but he draws the mouse, and the mouse looks a whole lot like Felix. And there we have the whole thing all put together. Now, I caught this in one of the Felix the cat things, and so I made a little GIF of it. Now, look what happens in this space. That there's the keyhole, in a sense, in the material world. Felix looks at the keyhole. He's got to save the damsel in distress. He crosses the barrier. And in a sense, the logos, which is the story side of the video, becomes flesh. It becomes the logos. The logos becomes reality, and it orders the world so that the plot can achieve its desired outcome. In Christianity, this is the resurrection. And this is why Glenn Beck starts the conversation by asking about the resurrection. And everybody who wants to put Jordan Peterson in a tribe and a camp, they immediately jump to the resurrection, and they don't know why. This is why. The Logos becomes flesh, and in the resurrection, according to Christian theology, Jesus inaugurates. Read Colossians 1. Jesus is the icon. Shout out to the Orthodox. Jesus is the icon of the invisible God. And through him, creation 1.0 is made. And in his resurrection, creation 2.0 is made. And that's why Jesus can both eat a fish and show up in a locked room. Those are the representations of. Does this really transcend the naturalist, supernaturalist question? Because the heart of this question, especially in the Christian world, where you have the resurrection to contend with, which forces you to contend with the future. And this is why Christians, when you start playing around with Adam, immediately jump to Romans 5 and Paul and Jesus as the second Adam, and why Christians immediately jump to the anticipation of a physical resurrection. This is why this question is so important to Christians, because it's one thing, we've been talking mostly about the past, but this really gains purchase, gets traction in our lives when we start thinking about the future, because we're terrified of the future quite rationally, because the future is unknown and the future is chaos. Now, I'm going to tip my hand a little bit here, because Genesis 1, the story starts, let there be light, let there be darkness. Well, darkness is chaos. Let there be sea and let there be dry land. Well, for the Hebrews, the sea is chaos. And in Genesis 1, God creates a fully functioning universe, but incorporates chaos within it. And as a small boy who was brought up in the Christian Reformed Church with the Christian tradition, who was formed by the Bible, I would read Genesis 3, and the question that bugged me was, why did God let the snake in the garden? Well, yeah, because snake is, didn't God know? Why does God have the trees in the garden? I think the story is written in that way to make us ask those questions. Why did God allow chaos in the garden, which is snake? And again, if you read Walton, Lost World of Adam and Eve, the snake is a chaos creature. Why does God, he doesn't eliminate the great sea out of which he speaks order into it. But then when you get to the book of Revelation, and you look at the new heaven and the new earth, there isn't any sea. Now again, I have church people that say, I love the ocean. I love to sit by the ocean. And again, if you're Jordan Peterson, you might ask a really good question. Why do you love to sit by the ocean? Why are you fascinated by watching the representation of female chaos? It's a good question. But Christians read Genesis or read Revelation in the new heavens and new earth, and they say there isn't any sea, and there isn't any night, and there isn't any darkness. Now again, this is part of the function of the literalism that we have picked up along the way, that we read back into the Bible, and I try to tell them the point of the new heavens and the new earth is not that there isn't any ocean. The point is there isn't any chaos. That's why there isn't any sea, and that's why darkness descends at the crucifixion of Jesus. These themes run throughout the Bible, and this has been for me how Jordan Peterson has been helpful for me in terms of being a Bible reader, because he's I wouldn't say he's opened my eyes to it, because I'd been looking at some of these ideas for a while, but maybe this is why my Jungian cloud of witnesses has manifest itself in me in this way. But this is why at the end of the Bible, you have the new heavens and the new earth where chaos no longer threatens. Now that opens up hosts of new questions. And look at, say, Prince Caspian, C.S. Lewis's Narnia Chronicle of the mature children in Narnia. And I'm going to have to get into this with C.S. Lewis, because C.S. Lewis, I think, rightfully elicits the questions and really helps answer the question, can we, in our present dispensation, well, there's a big word, in our present age, can we mentally think about what engaging reality would be without chaos? I doubt that we can. But I think it's represented for us to communicate. Now, okay, some of the Christians out there are getting nervous because you say, well, you believe in, okay, now these are our boundary markers. These are our shibboleths. You believe in a physical resurrection. I say, yes, I do. That's in a sense, I go to church, I pray, I read the Bible, I do these videos, I help people in anticipation of the resurrection. My heart longs for the day that chaos will no longer come into someone's life in the form of cancer, in the form of war, in the form of heart disease, in the form of a car accident, in the form of a divorce. I long for the day. I'm speaking the words of the book of Revelation when I say that. So, yeah, I'm down on the Christian side. But Peterson is making an argument, and I think giving us a bridge to have better conversations with people on the other side of the first question. So back to my text. Does this really transcend the naturalist, supernaturalist question? Because the heart of this question, especially in the Christian world, where you have the resurrection to contend with, which forces you to contend with the future. This is what really irks and bothers naturalists when you suggest that the space of God, let's call it spiritual. Now, not whenever, but I don't always jump on them because I do have some kindness in me. Whenever someone in a small group or a Sunday school class kind of throws out that word spiritual, I jump on them. Eugene Peterson, great Christian author, has written volumes about this. We don't know what spiritual means. And the naturalist framework defines spiritual in different ways than I do, but we keep using the word and we keep talking past ourselves. This is, in a sense, I think, the spiritual. This is what really irks and bothers naturalists when you suggest that the space of God, let's call it the spiritual, really does govern the material layer. And this gets back into this question of, does the story layer govern or does the physical layer govern? And that gets into Elon Musk. Look at Josh Topolsky asking Elon Musk at the Recode conference whether Elon Musk thinks that we are living in base reality, and listen to Elon Musk's answer. Fun. Can Felix the cat appropriate the question mark? Actually, not the question mark, but the exclamation point. Can Dorothy Sayers, the mind and the maker, Dorothy Sayers inspires C.S. Lewis with the analogy that
That we cannot discover God in the physical world for the same reasons Frodo can't discover Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings. The only way Frodo can know Tolkien is if Tolkien writes himself into the story. And Dorothy Sayers goes into that. Is it The Mind and the Maker? It might be her book. Sorry, again, I'm putting this together fast. I didn't line up all my slides, or my ideas always go all over the place anyway, so that never fully works. But as Dorothy Sayers says it, have the author write herself into the story. And Dorothy Sayers, in fact, does do that in some of her mystery plays. The Matrix. Can Neo transcend the Ithorian membrane? Can Neo, and this is, kind of the plot twist. This isn't the plot twist. This is basically the point of the Matrix movies, is that membrane gets punctured, and this is why we are fascinated with it. We have always been fascinated with it. This is the hope of magic. But this is why, again, where I wind up with C.S. Lewis. Because better than anyone else I've ever read, C.S. Lewis engages these issues. And I think one of the books that he engages them most clearly in is his book, Miracles. Now, this isn't, a lot of people read Mere Christianity, which is an amazing book. And for Francis Collins, the guy who did the Human Genome Project, who got BioLogos going, read Mere Christianity. And Mere Christianity has brought many people into the church and crossed the line into the Christian camp. But C.S. Lewis in Miracles asks finally, is naturalism finally coherent? And I've got this huge list of videos I want to do, and I've wanted to systematically engage this book for a long time. And ever since I found Jordan Peterson, I think in a sense I have a really good conversation partner to systematically engage C.S. Lewis's book, Miracles, because C.S. Lewis was, like Jordan Peterson, someone who in the Christian camp said really positive things about myth. C.S. Lewis loved myth. And C.S. Lewis basically said Christianity is the true myth. And if you Google, there's a guy out there doing C.S. Lewis doodles, C.S. Lewis doodles. So if you Google on YouTube, if you YouTube search C.S. Lewis doodles, search the Grand Miracle Doodle. And someone walks it, the guy draws as the narrator reads the chapter, and the Grand Miracle is in this book. Doesn't the Grand Miracle finally offer a better account of what we're seeing? That's what C.S. Lewis says, and I'm compelled greatly by Lewis. If you've never read Lewis, he's not necessarily easy. But when you get onto his wavelength, he's brilliantly clear and terribly, can't say enough about C.S. Lewis. And so C.S. Lewis basically will say, isn't Christianity finally the true myth? That all of the other myths, and this is where C.S. Lewis uses language like Jung, all of the other myths were dreams. That's what C.S. Lewis says. I don't know if C.S. Lewis read Jung. There's a really interesting book. I think I've got it right here. There's a very interesting book about C.S. Lewis and Freud, which is itself a fascinating book. But C.S. Lewis says that myths were dreams, and they were Christian dreams. And in the Christian story, the myth becomes reality. Logos, word becomes flesh. Logos becomes flesh. And whereas we have, in British terms, the Corn King dotted throughout mythology, in history, someone that, there might be a few skeptics out there say, we don't really know if Jesus lived. Most historians will take that point. And if you listen to Gary Habermas talk about the resurrection, even a lot of historians are saying, that They want to hold back on this miracle of the resurrection because, boy, if you cross that line, where does that leave you? And that's exactly what happened with C.S. Lewis. If you cross that line, where does that leave you? And that's exactly what C.S. Lewis's point is. He says, if you cross that line and if you buy the resurrection, and again, if you read N.T. Wright on the resurrection of the Son of God, I mean, he goes through the ancient world. N.T. Wright is a historian. This is a big book. Tim Keller, famous Christian preacher. He was going in, he had to have surgery for cancer. And he had two interesting things. He had a lot of time because he had to have surgery. So he took on this book. And basically, N.T. Wright, what N.T. Wright does in this book as a historian is say, the only reason you can account phenomenologically, historically, for the rise of Christianity is the resurrection of Jesus. That's the argument for it. And so Tim Keller reads this while he's going into surgery. But even while he goes into surgery, for all of his Christian being, the thought that gave him most comfort was the scene in The Lord of the Rings when Sam is at his extreme and he looks up into the sky and the clouds of Mordor part just a little and there is a star up there. And Tolkien says the light of that star smote him to his heart. And that's what gave him the courage to go into Mordor. If Tolkien and Lord of the Rings isn't Petersonian, I don't know what is. And so Tim Keller, this guy who is he's in some ways he's more conservative than I am. Tim Keller goes into surgery not, reciting Bible verses in his head over and over again, but thinking about Sam and Frodo and Sam being smote by the brilliance of that star. Oh, Christianity is the true myth, says C.S. Lewis. And I think C.S. Lewis is right. So I have gone on for an hour and 40 minutes. And again, part of me is amazed that anybody is watching these videos. And some of you write me and say you're watching all of these videos. And I think, well, part of me thinks, well, if I'm crazy to make them, you're crazy to watch them. So some of the commenters that say that, well, maybe they have a point. But on the other hand, I do it because I find it compelling. And my Jungian great cloud is driving me to this. I started for about the last 6 months. This gets into the Peterson business about you better listen to that call. Because for the last 6 months, I've been playing with these ideas, not just the Peterson ideas, but before Peterson in my life, playing with these ideas and thinking, I've been blogging for years and I should try something else. You got to make videos. You got to make videos. You got to make videos. People don't read books very much. People watch YouTube. People make videos. You got to make videos. And I keep thinking, you got to make videos. And I wasn't making videos. Well, now I'm making videos and, it's causing some chaos into my life. So it's the hero story and I'm descending into chaos and I don't know where it's going to lead. But here we are. And I'll put on some Christian language. I feel blessed. I feel finally humbled by the response. It's of course deeply validating, and with also being scary, but it's deeply validating, and I am humbled by the response, and maybe I shouldn't be taking this time to gush, but that's if Jordan Peterson can say it's an incredible idea, I can gush at the what this has meant for me. So thank you for watching. By watching it feels good. It feels good. My Jungian cloud of witnesses knows it. The Paul Vanderklay in front that's working this mouth can't quite put it into words, but there it is. And so maybe that'll be enough to keep me doing this, because it comes at a cost. It comes at a time cost. And, I'm accountable to my church for my time. And, so those of you who say, you're a pastor doing this for ministry. Yeah, I am. And in a sense, I have to be accountable to my church for the time. So here it is. This is the first commentary episode on Bible Series 2. And in great Jordan Peterson fashion, I have now made many hours of video and hardly talked about the Bible at all, or hardly got into the Bible. So if I keep doing this, hopefully next stop is Genesis 1 and let there be light, and dividing the seas and the dry land, and some John Walton and some Gerhard van Rad. Genesis is up there in the corner. And we'll see. We'll see. We'll see what we're coming into the Christmas season. I'll be busy with family stuff. Anybody who knows me as a writer knows that I write when I feel like it. I'm a very passionate writer in that way, and if I don't feel like it, I don't do it. So I'm feeling this, so I'm doing this, so here it is. And for whatever it's worth, thanks for watching.